Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Haley Spirabauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I am thrilled to welcome Diego Arambula, the Vice President for Educational Transformation at the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching. Welcome, Diego. How are you?
I am doing great. So great to be here with you, Haley. Thanks.
I'm so incredibly excited to talk to you today. I think, like you said before we started recording just now, we have a lot we could talk about. And the work you're doing, your career, all of that, I think we're going to get to a fraction of it just because of our kind of like time constraints here, but I know it's going to be a meaningful one. So let's jump in.
I'm in. I'm excited about the conversation. Our last one was great, so can't wait to keep it going.
Yeah, I so often get to meet people through doing this work, both with the podcast and through my professional job, who I just get really enamored by their thinking, their way of sharing ideas, and you are definitely one of them. So having you here today to have you on record talk about them is exciting for me.
Great. Yeah.
All right. So Diego, you're going to start us off. How did you come to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
So I am calling in from Fresno, California. The reason that matters is Fresno and this place and the people here, especially my parents, are a huge part of that story. So my dad is the first in his family born in this country, grew up a farm worker, and education absolutely transformed his life. And in college, he met my mom, and those two together set a model for my siblings and I of what it looks like to try and make the place you live in better for the people who live there. And I just watched that from a young age, saw them doing that through elected office and just thought, like, who are all of these suckers who aren't doing that work? I was like, yep, I'm in. Found my way to Washington, D.C. after college, only to realize, oh, Washington, D.C. is not full of my mom and dad. But was deeply committed to this idea of trying to create positive change. So I left the world of politics, found my way into education because I've always loved kids. And I was in a large comprehensive high school, just like the one that I had attended when I was a kid, only to realize, oh my gosh, that large comprehensive high school that had worked for me in some ways was not working for so many students. So when I became a teacher there, and so then I was asking the question of, am I going to leave the second profession by 25? That felt, my parents supported the first career shift.
Well, how much left was there?
Yeah, but I didn't know how much additional grace I would have. So, and I found my way to Diane Tavener, who at the time was running Summit Prep, a single charter school. I knew nothing about charter schools. And I went there because Diane had a belief that every single student was amazing and that a school's job was to make sure that they could meet the needs of every single student and ensure that they were thriving. I was all in on that mission, joined Summit Prep in its third teaching class. And for me, the rest was history, because once you see someone in education trying to reimagine school to better meet the needs of kids, every single step I've had since then has been driving me to bring my parents' vision of our job is to try and create positive change. And that vision I learned from Diane of it's on us to reimagine this system to work for kids, not on kids to look different for us. And so I've been trying to bring those two things together for the last 20 plus years.
So no more grace is needed because you found your home.
Yep.
You've lived your life in schools and now you're working beside schools, thinking a lot about transformation.
Yep.
So just for a second before we dive into the work you do every day, what is the utopian? This is big, but what does the utopian school teaching and learning environment look like for you, Diego?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it should be a place where, uh, so let's think about it from what are the felt experiences and then what are the actual outcomes. It should be a place that students love to be. I mean, they should just absolutely feel loved and supported, feel challenged, feel engaged in exactly the things that they are looking to do. So it should just feel wildly different for students. It should feel wildly different for the adults who love to work alongside students. They should be so excited about the work they're doing every day. They should feel supported. They should feel challenged. They should feel like they are enabled to support the students on that journey. And it should lead to wildly better outcomes. And those should really be tied to real world preparation, not I can do better on a paper and pencil test. I mean, look, that is a measure by which we have today. But in this wild vision of the future, students should love to be there, should feel challenged, should feel engaged in rigorous work, should feel passionate. Teachers should love to be there, all adults who are engaged to support them. And students should be walking into the world ready to take on the challenges that set them up for success. And we need them to be ready to solve these problems that our world is up against, that unless students are ready to do this kind of real world work, you know, we might be in some trouble as a society. So that's my utopia. And I believe that this could be possible.
Well, that note of hope is huge. But I want to go back to the fact that you led with heart, and the heart being the feeling kids and teachers and school leaders have in the physical building and their attitudes about school. You know, currently we're looking at extremely concerning mental health rates for students, extremely concerning turnover and attrition rates for teachers, leaders, superintendents. And so, you know, it feels like Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little bit here, that if we meet this need of belonging and community, which isn't necessarily as important as shelter and home, we can then meet other needs beyond that. So it says a lot about you as a person that you led with that, Diego.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. And maybe I also say this as a dad of two kids.
Right.
You can see little pictures of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a ninth grader and a seventh grader. I don't know if you had a chance. The Tim, our president here at the Carnegie Foundation, was on a webinar with folks who wrote the teen disengagement crisis.
Yes.
Part of the reason we're leading with heart is because we love kids. And as I think about my own kids, I want that to be their experience. The other reason is because we are seeing absolute disengagement from school. Not as wouldn't it be nice to have if they just liked to be there?
Yes.
But it is having just downstream massive effects on our ability to actually do the rigorous work.
Right.
If students are just not showing up in the first place, and we're seeing chronic absenteeism rates, or if when they're there, they are just simply passive and wildly disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot do the kinds of deep learning, rigorous learning,
Sure.
real world prep. So it's a both and to me that we
Right.
have to lead with what it feels like to be in school. And on the teacher side, my goodness, it is hard to be a teacher right now. It is hard to be a school leader right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started in the classroom in the early 2000s, it was fun.
Right.
It was a really, if you love high schoolers, and I think that's such a fun age, it was a really fun job. And we need to get back to that so that we, tap into the talent of all of our amazing teachers too.
Yeah. And I candidly did not watch the webinar, but I'll link it in my newsletter. I did read the Atlantic piece called The Teen Disengagement Crisis by Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop, and I sent it to everyone I know because I was like, yeah, this is a huge red flag. So thank you for bringing up the webinar. I will make sure to watch it as a follow-up.
Great.
So let's talk about Carnegie, right? So how is Carnegie reimagining schools? You've been leading the effort to rethink high school education. What are the biggest shifts you believe need to happen for high school to better prepare students for the future?
So I know that the most simplistic answer would be to say to pick a name du jour. It's competency-based education or it's career-connected learning. But in some ways, what we continue to come back to is that there is an architecture to school, Haley, that was built around the Carnegie Unit. The reason most of us, and as someone who got my master's in education, was in the classroom, was a school leader, have supported school leaders, I did not know about this thing called the Carnegie Unit until a couple of years ago. But it is the architecture behind school, created back in 1906 from the Carnegie Foundation. And it really did a couple of things. At the time, it was critical because it helped us create an architecture by which we might define learning. And so we tied learning and time together in creating the Carnegie Unit, sometimes now called a credit hour. And now that's how we are organizing our schools. It's everything from how we are assessing our kids. It's how we're taking attendance. It's how we're choosing even what gets assessed. It's what goes on a transcript. It's what post-secondary is asking for. It's how when WASC or any other accreditor is coming in and determining, are you doing the things? It's tied to the Carnegie Unit. By the time they get to higher ed, it's like, this is how financial aid is determined. So it is all of these pieces. And so anytime we're trying to make a shift, so your question was like, what is our vision of shifting? And to me, anytime we're trying to make a shift, it is impeded by the fact that the entire back-end architecture of school is tied to this idea that if you want to know that someone is learning, I have tied one human in one place to one block of time to that learning. We have to recreate that architecture and build a new architecture. We know that education has evolved. The research could not be more clear about what young people need. And I mean, teachers tell us this all the time. Students are telling this all the time. And so we need to rebuild an architecture that is not built around that back end of a Carnegie Unit in which time and learning is conflated, but rather something where we've said, here's the broad set of goals that everyone should reach. Of course, they're academic goals, but they have to be a slew of other goals that we care about. We see this in Portraits of a Graduate all the time. Here are the variety of learning experiences students have to access and get better at those goals and to get feedback on those goals. And then here are the signals that we're going to create. And the reality is, when you create something that's organized around goals, learning experiences, and signals, time is not one of those three things. Place is not one of those three things. So you begin to say what really matters is hitting those goals. And you may do that in a workplace. You may do that in an extracurricular activity. You may do that on a Tuesday night or a weekend. It doesn't all need to happen in one place at one time for one block, all in the same way.
I can't even sit still because I'm so excited as I hear you talk about this. It's just fascinating to me how tightly held we are to a system that was built for an entirely different time. And so to hear about the reframe and the rethink and the manner in which Carnegie is leading this work is so exciting. I know you have partners on this journey that are helping it. So let's talk about, what does this look like on the school level, right? Because I talk so much on this podcast about implementation science. We know so much from research, but what actually happens when we bring these good ideas into a school? So let's talk about what does it look like on the school level and who are you collaborating with to ensure this reformed thinking or like kind of advanced thinking is really impacting kids?
I love that question. The former teacher and school leader in me is like just enamored, right? Because it's almost too easy for us to stay at the like. I am deeply hopeful and believe we can get to this place, but we need to make sure that what we're actually talking about is great. Then what does it take for this work to the language we've been using is to root, to sustain, and to scale. Because if it's just the reality is what we're seeing too often is that actually this vision of school that I was just painting does exist in some places today. You see students learning outside of school walls. You see students in internships and apprenticeships. You see this amazing, rigorous learning happening in classrooms that isn't necessarily tied to time. You just see it for very small pockets of kids in very small settings and often for limited periods of time. And then we either see a retreat to the status quo or we see a walling off to say, well, they're different. And that works in this one space. And so we are deeply committed to saying, great, if what we're talking about here is not moving 10 more students at a time, but really moving at scale. So we have to think about how this work roots, sustains, and scales. A lot of our thinking is informed by the 8-year study. I don't know. Have you read the 8-year study?
You're giving me all this like required reading, and I could not be more excited.
This one's super short. The 8-year study is really short. So
Okay,
I will make sure to link that for you. But the idea of the 8-year study is we're not the first people to actually think that, hey, wait, conflating time and learning is problematic. So I think it was 80 years ago. It was a long time ago. They took on something, they called it the 8-year study. It wasn't actually 8 years long. I think it was 14 years, but they called it the 8-year study because they were thinking about high school to college. And what they found is they found these amazing ways to move systems. And then after they pulled the funding for the study, poof. When they then went back and looked at all of these places, hundreds of places, it had almost all dissipated. And so a deep belief that there is work that we need to do. This is the reason why we will be partnering with a set of systems, but undergirding and more important than all of that is a deep R&D agenda so that we can develop a set of sustainable tools and research deeply what are the forces, right? Policy, professional development, human capital pipelines, local and state leadership, all the tech tools that we like, how do all of these things interplay and what are the enabling conditions and what are those forces and how do we move them at scale? Because if you just move one, too often, if the others stay stagnant, the whole system just comes crumbling back down. And so that work through the R&D agenda that we're going to be launching is a critical component to help us then figure out how do we do that in real places, learn deeply, and then use that to drive building the conditions that it's going to take for this work to scale.
And that launch is right around the corner. I think by the time this is released, it will be like either just have launched or we'll be launching in a couple weeks. And I was doing some, research myself on this initiative, and you have quite the collaborative group set up to really think deeply about it, which is so exciting.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, our team has been unbelievable. I mean, we have some incredibly smart folks in-house, but they have just brought together an amazing expert work group to really help inform. So we've been able to listen deeply to researchers in the field, but also to those working most closely with students, most closely with parents, most closely with teachers, with school leaders, and and systems themselves. And so we're really hopeful that that's going to help us build an R&D agenda that is both the smartest it can be when it comes out of the gates, but also informed most deeply by those directly inside of the systems and impacted by our systems.
You know, a common theme is that we can't do this work alone. And I think your example here is so illustrative of that. We have to collaborate and lean on one another and work together kind of in the same boat, rowing in the same direction.
That's right.
Yeah. So Diego, you know, you are often talking about reimagining high schools and what it takes. And you're talking about, I mentioned a little bit the implementation science. How does Carnegie measure success? Like, you know, we can have all these really great ideas, but what in this, I'm imagining in this expert working group, you're also going to be talking about the outcomes you're looking for. So what are the outcomes that are most pertinent in this study of reimagining schools and transforming strategy?
Yeah, I mean, so I love this question. I would start again somewhere close to where we began, which is we should see systems, schools where students feel differently and are experiencing wildly different outcomes against a broader set of goals. To get to that place in 5 to 10 years, to really think about that, we're going to need a whole slew of things. So we're going to need this national R&D agenda. We're going to need actual places where this work is moving from the margins of school into the mainstream of school so that we see that that's possible. We're going to need the deep understanding of what that took to move from the margins to the mainstream in real places so that all of those who surround and support schools, funders, decision makers, leaders, begin to put these pieces into place in more and more settings. And so our measure of success is first and foremost that we deeply understand what it takes to root, sustain, and scale, that we have evidence of that, and that we begin to then see evidence of others taking that up. This is going to be dependent on that R&D agenda I talked about, on these real examples, but it's also going to be dependent, Haley, on a set of scalable tools. Because what we can't replicate is, oh, if you just had Haley. So the solution here is just hire Haley, because there's only one of you.
Yeah.
And right. So how do we build up the tools too? And again, this is a place where at Carnegie, we're a pretty small shop. So we are not looking to do this work alone. Instead, we're looking to just help bring together the amazing people doing this research in systems, building these new scalable tools so that all of those can come packaged together and drive this change to the mainstream.
Yeah, no, root, sustain, and scale just became the title of this episode, which I know is a phrase that you use all the time. It sounds like it's like a central tenet of your work. Yeah. So I'm going to borrow it for the title of this episode. But, let's talk a little bit about innovation, because obviously there's a lot of things you've talked about here that require a reframing, a rethinking, a restructuring. Let's talk specifically about tools, maybe technology. What's one unexplored area of school redesign in terms of tool technology that gets you really excited? Like to give context, you worked at Summit. You talked about Summit. Summit really was at the forefront of thinking about personalized learning. For those that are unfamiliar, please go Google it. I'll link to it in my show notes here in the newsletter. But you saw, years ago, transformation and technology adoption ahead of its time. So what gets you excited today?
Wow. Maybe I'll start my answer this way. I think the thing I'm most excited about is not necessarily any one individual tool, but rather more and more school leaders are approaching tool adoption through the thinking of the Christensen Institute, right? And Clay Christensen of what's the job to be done here. And for too long, tools were built and then shoved inside of systems. And something that was so unbelievable when we were at Summit and developing the personalized learning platform, the PLP, the thing that was great is that we actually went in search of a tool and nothing did the thing that we wanted to do for students. And so then we said, well, we've got to go build it. And that very first year, I was the principal at our school where we were doing this work, and we did it in Google Sheets. And literally there was just a guy who every night was taking the data out of Khan Academy, because at the time you had to download it, and then he would upload it into a different sheet, turn it into, and we had color-coded Google Sheets. Look, that is not an effective tool, but it did exactly the thing we needed it to do and allowed us to personalize learning in ways that no tool on the market at the time did. I'm not suggesting that every school and system needs to go down that path, but I am saying it's really exciting to see so many folks developing tools, developing alongside systems now to meet the actual needs that they have and to answer that. So that's the first answer. And then the second, and then I promise I'll be done, but I just think I could probably, no, I have three. So that's my first. The second is,
bring it.
We are doing some work with ETS, developing assessments around how to assess all of the skills that we know matter. Collaboration, communication, critical thinking in authentic ways embedded into actual teaching, as opposed to like stop at the end of the year and assess this thing. I'm pretty fired up about. Those are really early stage, so I can't say like, yeah, everyone should be using that exact, but I'm really excited about that because that is a job to be done. We are hearing from everyone, from students themselves who want to get better at those things, from schools who are trying to prioritize those things. We see that in portraits, from employers, from parents. So that's a second. And third, the third part of my answer to this is innovation is going to have to be it will be part of what unlocks this. If we are attempting to move away from a structure of the conflation of time and learning, innovative and scalable tools have to be part of how we create this future that you and I were painting together. If students love being there and are prepared for the real world, teachers love being there. You can't build that while still taking attendance and entering grades in the exact same way and sitting down at the end of the year and basically pausing school for a month in April. I mean, we're going to have to rethink. And so I can't even imagine what those tools are, but I have to imagine that technology and these scalable tools are going to be a huge part of the solution.
Fired up, Diego.
Yeah.
Hearing you talk has me very fired up.
Yay.
I mean, listen, at the end of the day, you know, you could talk a lot about making tweaks, and then you could talk a lot about exploding things. And I kind of like to explode things. So I'm excited by just the approach the methodical approach, right? This isn't just like willy-nilly, like, oh, we have an idea. It's a very thoughtful, methodical approach with various stakeholders engaged. And it makes me really hopeful, like I said at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah. And you know, we're certainly not here to blow things up.
Okay. Sorry. I didn't mean to put words in your mouth.
but we're also not here for, 1 to 2% gains.
Right.
Here into the future, and those play a critical role. And so Tim put something out. I'm gonna geek out for 1 minute around this. Took a class in college on evolution and this notion of deep time. We don't understand just how big, how much time has passed and the very small role we play in it. And one of the interesting things is when we think about evolution, we think about evolution being this sort of like, oh, we went from this to this on a somewhat straight line. And in reality, when we go and measure it, evolution does create these very small changes over time. But actually, the biggest points of evolution are what are called punctuated equilibrium. These like drastic moments of extreme change in which then the 1 to 2% tiny evolution change is happening. And yet our vision is like, oh, this has happened over millions of years. Great. So this changed over millions of years. When in reality, the story is sort of like it looked almost exactly the same. And then boom. And then kind of looked almost exactly the same. I believe we're at that moment of punctuated equilibrium, which does not mean burn the house down.
Okay, I won't say that again. I'm going to use punctuated equilibrium.
but it does mean drastic change.
Sure.
Students are demanding it. The workforce is demanding it. Parents are demanding it. The tools around us are enabling it. And this is the moment for bold. It's not the moment for safe and what's the next thing that gets me just a little bit better. Because the reality is that just doesn't meet the moment of what young people themselves are asking for, what families, what the communities are asking for, what the communities demand, nor this moment of what our tools are finally enabling us to do. So I believe we're at that moment of punctuated equilibrium. And we will look back and say, oh, that was the 10 years where things like we built a new architecture and ended in a place where but what we don't want is to look back and say that's the time where we tore down public education. It is too critical and has been a centerpiece of what's so amazing about our country is this promise we have.
Yes.
We need to live up to that promise. And for too many students, we're not there right now. And so that's why I feel we at the Carnegie Foundation feel such deep need to do this work.
Yes.
And deep optimism and hope that now this is the time.
I love that. I love the idea of taking this energy and harnessing it for building a better promise of public education in our country. That is so exciting to me. And the idea of phrasing it as punctuated equilibrium will live in my brain forever now.
Oh, yeah.
I think that when I first made the comment about blowing things up, I want to be very clear that I'm not supporting blowing up the Department of Education, blowing up our public education system. And I understand how that could be misinterpreted. I think that I feel personally a restlessness about how education has existed for historically oppressed, systemically marginalized communities for so long. And so when I talk about blowing things up, what I more mean is thinking very differently about, as you said, the job to be done.
That's right.
You know, Diego, I'm leaving this conversation with like new language to say that, especially at a time right now when it's critical to be precise about our language. So I really just want to pause and say thank you for that, because I didn't realize the message I might have been conveying when in reality where my heart and head stand.
Well, and in the conversations we've had to date and today, I know that's not where you are. We need to make sure there is a huge American consensus right now about protecting public education, about the need for public education, about the goals of public education. I mean, when you look at portraits of a graduate from across the country, it doesn't matter whether you're in a red state or a blue state, in a big city or out in the sticks. Everywhere, they look so similar. the things that parents and students are asking for are so aligned. Like we agree as a country
Yes.
on this. We agree that education is a stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
It's just time for those of us who have some role to play in that to step up and say, great, to stop being safe. Because the safest thing to do is to do what we did last year, just a tiny bit better.
Yes.
And this is not the time to play it safe. It is the time to do something big and to meet this moment. And that is where your heart is, to say, we have got to rethink and not just play it safe.
Yeah.
And to lean into that American consensus of, this is like, let's finally fulfill that promise for all kids.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I could not agree more. Diego, this conversation has been amazing in so many ways. And I am arriving here at my last question, which is going to once again zoom us from the top down to the very, very micro of our classrooms. So I want you to think about a brand new high school teacher who's starting their career. What advice would you give them?
Well, first, I would just say thanks to them. I mean, look, I loved being in the classroom. I think of all the jobs I've held, maybe camp counselor. I loved being a camp counselor, but being a high school teacher was probably my favorite job. So I would tell them, like, buckle up. It's really, like, it can be really fun, and this is so important. And I would say thanks. None of everything we've talked about today happens without really committed, really creative teachers. But I think what I'd really tell them is, you are walking into a system that isn't yet set up to fully lean into your creativity and all of your brilliance. And so go try and find those places who are on that journey so that you can tap in and do this work. Try and create that within your school, within your district, and if you can't, within your classroom, such that you're trying to move in this way. But we are stronger together. And so I would hope that they could find their way in much the same way that, when I started my story of saying I was at a large comprehensive high school that was not going to shift. And I found my way to a place that was. We are trying to build more and more of these places where that work is moving from the margins to the mainstreams. And I would encourage teachers to try and find those places to lean in and to just help that work scale.
Amazing. Diego, you are such a light, and this conversation has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for spending your time with us.
So excited to be here with you today, talking about all of this. This also got me pretty fired up. You kept seeing me like glasses on and off and leaning in. So
you could tell when the two of us are excited. There's like a level of energy that just shifts up.
Yeah, that's right. So I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
No, this is great. And you know what? I'm grateful for the conversation and also the reading list you gave me, because I'm going to be sharing it with the audience. And I know we're all going to get a lot smarter and a lot more committed and a lot more hopeful about what's next.
Great. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate the time.
And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.